Hello, everyone. A very good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from the world today. I'm Fazil. I'll be your host, and I'm a part of ManageEngine PAM. Today's webinar is all about how you can fine-tune your PAM implementation and what are the key factors and common pitfalls to look for when you're implementing PAM. We have been implementing PAM for around 15 years, right? And we'd also like to share our experience doing so, some case studies, some best practices, and so on. Joining me today is a true expert in that matter. I'm joined by Christus, ManageEngine PAM's implementation lead, and he will be able to take us through the entire session today. Before I hand over the microphone to him, couple of housekeeping rules. All attendees will be on listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A panel, and we'll pick them at the end of the session. And if you have any further feedback for us, you can always email us at hello-pam360@manageengine.com. Without further ado, Christus, over to you.
Thank you for the great introduction, Fazil. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join the webinar today. My name is Christus. I am part of the PAM 360 team in ManageEngine. Been in ManageEngine for 14 years now, and I predominantly take care of the implementation for our customers who get our product and want to bring in a privileged access management practice or a product within their organization. I go listen to them, understand their requirements, and do some analysis on the infrastructure, and help implement the PAM completely into operations, and also train their users from different functions about like how best you can get out of the product and how the users can use the solution. So without further ado, let me get into the topic for today, which is the PAM implementation. What are the key factors and the common pitfalls that you or your organization may fail when implementing a PAM solution? So as first step, like what you have to do as an organization after you procure a PAM solution is that you have to understand like what are the PAM fundamentals. Why do you need a PAM solution in an organization, and why it matters? Like how are you going to enforce the privileged access to your the whole set of workforce or the IT infrastructure that you have, and the evolving threat landscape of privileged accounts. Like these days, like there are so many new attacks coming in. How do you foolproof or safe your critical infrastructure, the crown jewels of your organization from those attacks, the evolving threats that's coming, the new attacks surfaces that are coming, and what are the key business drivers for your PAM implementation, and how do you get in the buy-in from your stakeholders or from your internal employees, and how do you certify your organization against the regulatory compliance requirements. If from different function or different industry or different country, you will have specific regulations for your organization that you have to get certified for, and how do you implement PAM, privileged access management tool, to get the certification without any many manual works. And how do you bring PAM as part of your comprehensive security strategy in bolstering your security of your organization? How do you implement PAM and put a privileged access management practice in place is something that you have to understand even before starting the implementation of a PAM tool within your organization. So this is now put, the implementation plan is put into 6 major factors that you see in this slide. The first 2 are like accessing and identifying and categorizing, right? So first thing is like access your organization privileged access needs, how it is today, how are you providing access to one of your third-party vendor or your internal employee to one of the critical assets in your organization, be it a network device. A network engineer wants to go there and do some configuration changes, or let's say you have Linux machine and you want to do some configuration changes or push patches or do some critical task within that Linux device, or be it a Windows machine, you want to go in there and perform certain operation, a critical operation within that Windows machine, is what you have to access today, like how you are providing access to your organization. And second step is identifying and categorizing the privileged accounts that you have in your organization. For instance, when you take an organization, I would say like 80% of the implementation I have done so far, as the first step, when I go through this two process, the first step I identify after I go and see is that the end users in your organization holding multiple accounts, meaning they will have, when it comes to Active Directory, they will have a non-privileged account and a privileged account, which is a domain admin account for them to do critical operations within your infrastructure. And also the normal user account will be used for them to log into do an SSO or log into their applications or even to log into their laptop. So now the question is, why do you need another domain administrative account? And when you have a large IT team in your organization, let's say 50 people are there, you will end up having 50 domain administrator account, which is named accounts for each and every user. So the ideal goal is, how do you limit this? To limit this, you have to first identify and categorize these type of privileged accounts. And also you have human identities and non-human identities within your organization, which are privileged identities again. Non-human identities also cause more risk to your organization equally as the human identities. So what are the non-human identities? Service accounts you have, which are running services silently doing their job without any intervention. And also you have scheduled task IAS app pools. Those are non-human identities. And also you have accounts used in scripts or for orchestration or any automation you're running. You have an account there. Those are non-human identities, which are equally important as human identities. So that's the second step, where you categorize and identify the privileged accounts that you have in your organization. Conduct a risk assessment. So with this data that you have got, how do you conduct, how risky is your organization right now without implementing a privileged access management or a privileged access management practice? What are the risks involved? This is the third step. And building your implementation roadmap will be the fourth step. With all this data that you have acquired on the right-hand side with the three categories, how do you build your implementation roadmap of your PAM tool? And during this phase, you also have the selection process about like which would be the best fit for your needs. And also the fifth part will be the securing the stakeholders and buy-in across departments. So when it's stakeholders, you can convince them about like how are you going to increase the security after implementing a PAM tool. And also you can clearly have a tabular column to differentiate between how it is today and how it will be in future after implementing a PAM solution for stakeholders. Now coming into the departments, you have Linux team, network engineers, Windows administrators, cloud administrators, DevOps engineers in your organization. How are you going to get the buy-in from them, which would be a bit of a critical task or a tough task for you, I would say, because you're going to change their practice. Today they are using efficiently just an administrative account and go and use it whenever they need it. So here you have to make them understand what is the risk that it processes their administrative account, and tell them like what if happens if this particular account is into the bad actor's hand. Like say a hacker gets hold of this account, a domain admin account of John or Joel in your organization, what would be the risk that is involved, just not for the organization and also for this particular employee whose account is being misused, right? So you have to make them understand and get the buy-in across different departments, database admins, Linux admins. Being an infrastructure team, this would be your main task and goal that you have to convince them. And coming into the last one, which is the budgeting consideration and how do you do the ROI calculations. So these are the 6 steps that you have to implement before starting a PAM implementation. How do you plan it? And as the next step, what are the key success factors that you can obtain after implementing a PAM? So this also can be used in order to get a buy-in from the stakeholders and also from the internal department members from different teams. Establishing a cross-functional implementation team. So which means first step, like let's say a customer invites me for an implementation. I go to the customer, and the first step that I do is after all this phase is done, I request them to give me a team of members from different departments. Like if the team is spread into Linux, Windows, database, cloud, DevOps engineers, I'll ask, like, give me one member from each team whom I can work with in order to get PAM rolled out within your organization. And if you who are watching this webinar, if you are going to do this, please do the same thing. Go call out each member from each team who has access to all the devices. They know how it actually operates right now, and get them onboarded to your team, where it would be an implementation team of PAM in your organization. Next is like creating comprehensive policies for your privileged accounts. So now you have the team. So now you have to give them the task of finding out the policies that you have to set on your privileged accounts, be it for network devices or Linux machines or Windows machines or databases or so forth. And designing the authentication workflows that balance the security and usability. How are you going to design the authentication? That is, when you implement privileged access management in your organization, that comes between your workforce and your infrastructure. So now you have to design an authentication workflow for your workforce in order to get access to your critical infrastructure, which are crown jewels, which holds all the critical data there, right? So now you have to design this authentication workflow for your users, which is your workforce. It could be your internal employees, help desk engineers, IT admins, as well as the third-party contractors whom do you employ in order to do the critical task within your organization. Implementing the principle of least privilege. So that is where you remove all the domain admin accounts for them and implement the POLP process where they have the least privilege in your organization. So meaning if they have a domain user account, that is all they have. And when they need administrative access to one of the servers, that is given time bound only when they need it. Like say, for example, they have 1 hour work, only 1 hour you provide privilege for them. And after that, they just in the least privileged mode without any additional administrative access, which is not required because they are going to do their job only for a hour or two, connecting to one of the devices. And after that, this account is like doesn't mean that it has to have the privilege or hold the privilege all the time. So you demote it, just make it as a normal user, and the user can do his regular job. So implementing the principle of least privilege, session monitoring and recording best practices. This is for you, being administrators of the company, of the team. You have to know what is happening in your devices that you own or that you have deployed in your organization. You have to know what are the critical commands executed, what are the operations performed on these devices. It can be done by monitoring and recording. And for this, a privileged access management tool has to be employed. And also you have automated password management strategies that you have to build, meaning the privileged accounts that you have onboarded into your organization, it has to be rotated every 30 days, 60 days, based on your need. And also if Linux team requires the accounts to be reset every 30 days, whereas Windows team wanted to do it bi-weekly, you have to set up strategies. Similarly, policies has to be defined, which is the password policies for different teams. Just-in-time access provisioning has to be provided for your users, and integration with existing security tools and infrastructure is also very important. So these are the 8 key success factors that you have to monitor in order to have or employ in order to have your complete your successful PAM implementation. So coming into the next one, the deep dive into the technical implementation of a PAM tool, starting with the architecture considerations, meaning what are the infrastructure that you have. How are the devices segregated within your infrastructure? Let's say you have team across the globe. How do they get access to one of the devices that sits in the data center 1, and how another team gets access to the devices sitting in the data center 2? If you are segregated across different subnets or different geographies, is the architecture consideration. So this is very important in a PAM implementation. That is, you have to understand the architecture. How are you operating today? What are the devices you have? How is your firewall placed is all that you have to identify. See if it's a hybrid infrastructure and place the jump servers wherever required if it's in hybrid infrastructure. And what are the implementation phases that you are going to plan after this, which will be the 3rd step. 4th step is vaulting mechanism. The first step of PAM is to bring in all your privileged accounts into a centralized place, which is your repository and which is your vault, a secure vault. Session management capabilities comes second, which is how do you provide access and how do you monitor them? How do you know what's happening in your infrastructure? Application to application password management, which is comes the sixth place here, which is like apart from human identities, you also have to provide equal uh, importance to the non-human identities in your organization so that you onboard them and also you bring them into management, the service accounts you have there, the application accounts you have there, and also the DevOps integration like CI/CD pipelines, if there is any automations running. How do you safely integrate that with your PAM implementation will be the seventh step. And eighth step will be the cloud environments. If you have YaaS, such as AWS, Azure, GCP, how do you implement the zero standing privileges or implement the POLP, the principle of least privilege, as well as how do you provide just-in-time access, and also how do you remove the over excessive permissions on the cloud environments is the eighth step. So this is how you have to take the implementation phase by phase within your organization. And what are the common pitfalls and how to avoid them when you are implementing, going through this, the planning phase or the implementation phase of the PAM tool, which is the scope creep, where you start off with too many things. So what I would say or recommend our customers when I go for an implementation is take one step at a time. So first start with vaulting, and then you can go by phases we'll implement. So that gets us to the success instead of doing everything at a single point. Because like, let's say you are doing the vaulting, like you're discovering the privileged account at the same time, you're also working with someone to provide privileged access to it. That's not how it's going to work. So you have to go phase by phase, taking the first step at a time. And so that is to avoid the scope creep of implementing PAM. Insufficient user training and change management. So that is during the due course of the implementation, you have to train the users or at least the stakeholders of each and every functions that you have onboarded so that they understand the importance and they also know how it is going to be implemented in your organization. Overlooking service accounts and application identities. So what you will think as an IT administrator, okay, I have all the domain admins in place. I have all the security groups now monitor and manage. I don't want to go on to the NHIs, which is the non-human identities, which is wrong. They have possess the equal risk as a human identity. So bring them into the process, bring them into the management is what you have to do. So you don't overlook the service accounts. Neglecting the third-party access management. Just not your internal users. 90% of percentage of the organization today have third parties or third party vendors accessing their critical assets. How do they access it? What monitoring that you have in place? What security you have in place? You have to identify. Poor emergency access procedures are something that is like neglected, and set it and forget it mentality. That is, you set the product, then forget it. So that does not work with PAM. When it comes for privileged access management, it's a continuous process that you have to do because the threats are evolving. So when you have set up a process and you are good with everything, there is another problem comes in that you have to address it. So you have to maintain and monitor the releases of the PAM tool that you have employed and what are the new features in order to implement and how do you get buy-in from your users. You have to keep analyzing them, ignoring the user experience leading to workarounds. So these are some of the common pitfalls and how do you avoid them during your PAM implementation journey. So how do you measure the success after the successful PAM implementation? First thing is KPIs of your PAM program, conducting regular privileged audits of all your privileged accounts, continuous monitoring and threat detection, and updating your PAM strategy as the threat evolves. So these are the continuous process that you have to do, right? And first thing is to set the KPIs of your PAM program that you have implemented. So this comes here, we come into the real world case studies. So I have picked a couple of examples that I will be showing you going further, and we'll be covering all these three major capabilities, the real world examples, the lessons learned, and also the security postures and comparisons before and after a PAM implementation. So coming into an implementation that was conducted last year for one of our very large bank in one of the countries, meaning like half of the population, I would say, of that particular country is using their services, this particular bank. So you can imagine how big they are. And also you will have the infrastructure that they have, like 5,000 servers, 2,500 servers. So this is specific only to Windows because it's just the first implementation phase, and there are so many network devices, Linux machines in that infrastructure as well. So now we are doing only for the Windows machines. So there are 5,000 servers on the IT side, and on the OT side there are 2,500 servers with 1,500 privileged accounts. And when it is a scenario one, it's 9,000 privileged accounts. The timeline for this particular setup is 8 weeks implementation plan, and the approach I did it was weekly milestones, and also the focus is to bring in security, efficiency, and operational continuity for that particular organization. So coming into the phases that we built is like 8-week phases. The first 3 weeks that you see goes completely into discovery, design, and the infrastructure setup, not touching into any of the PAM and going into completely figuring out what is the implementation, like what is the infrastructure looks like, and how a PAM, where we have to set up the PAM tool, where we have to place it, as well as where we have to place the jump service, if it's a hybrid environment or if it's completely an on-premise environment, how do we place and how do we build the connectors, custom connectors that would be required for the organization goes in the first 3 phases. That is week 1, week 2, and week 3. And week 4 onwards, we start the first implementation wave, second implementation wave, and this goes into 3 weeks where we actually do the implementation. Week 7 is testing and completely for testing and validation, fixing the gaps. And week 8 will be the transition to operations. So this is an 8-week cycle where the initial week is to identify the architecture design, as I told you. So when you go into the PAM 360 help documentation, this would be the common architecture that's available. What you have to identify here is you have to build a rough architecture. You have to identify your infrastructure and build a rough architecture like this. So this is an example of a small enterprise. So where they had device both on-premise that you see in the left-hand side, the databases, Unix device, and all that are on-premise. And also they had devices on the Azure tenant, the Linux and Windows machine. So the ask here is they want to manage the complete infrastructure that you see in the left-hand side with all these integrations that you see in the bottom, which is IGA, SIEM, ITSM, RPA capabilities, DevOps, and containers to be part of the integration. So this was the customer's ask. Another point to note here is they want to place their PAM in their Azure infrastructure, not on their on-premise. They want to put it in different tenants for high availability. So the PAM 360 product is as flexible as, like, you can put it or deploy it in any infrastructure you have. So be it like you have an on-premise and you want to place one PAM 360 server with one high availability server, yes, it's possible. If you want to put it in Azure and you want to split it into 2 different tenants, even that is possible, and that's exactly what this shows, the infrastructure. You can either put it in on-premise or also in your IaaS network as well. So here it is Azure for that specific matter, because we have the third-party vendors also accessing and also internal users accessing. So third-party vendors have been provided access through HTTPS and WAF, Web Access Firewall, to get into PAM. Similarly, the normal users who are internal organizational users access PAM using the A2A3 through a load balancer that's configured that you see here. And now this comes in between, right? So you're deploying PAM between your workforce and the workplace, right? So this is one example that you have to set up the architecture diagram before even you go to the next step. So another one is a very large enterprise. They had devices on the LAN, they had it on the IaaS, which is on the cloud, as well as they have so many automations running, the APIs and bots running in their organization. So how did we deploy PAM here is we had a database, a centralized place where we put the database, and also we had multiple application servers. So what benefit you get of PAM 360 is that you can configure multiple application servers pointing to a same cluster database. You can either use an internal database bundle with a product, which comes with the product with no additional charge, PostgreSQL, with which you can have multiple high availability servers configured. It's so flexible. As well as you also have a Microsoft SQL option available where you can externalize the database, where it can be a cluster. In front, you can put multiple application nodes. So that's exactly what you see here. We have multiple application nodes for user access, for session management, for RDP, SSH access, or any remote access, they'll be going through this session management service. An API service is deployed. So this is purely to differentiate or distribute the load for the users, because it's just not few users, it's 10,000 users who are going to go and access the PAM tool in that particular organization. And when it's so much of load, you have to have different application servers deployed, and also APIs. There are going to be 10,000 requests coming in and out of the PAM tool. So we have separate servers set up for the APIs for it to query the PAM tool and take it. So this is how this is a global organization to which this architecture is proposed, and it is going to be the users across different countries who will be accessing the PAM tool. So why I'm saying this is the first step, which is very important. That is, you have to build the architecture diagram even before going any further. The first implementation wave then started. After designing and putting all that analysis together, the core infrastructure setup, I started the first implementation wave, starting with the 30% of service and few capabilities of PAM, bringing in the assets and their privileged accounts, and implementing the session recording capabilities, how it is put into practice, train the users, that particular operational team, which is the Windows team here, and brought everything into place. That is in the first implementation wave. And first start with the process documentation. As the second implementation phase, remaining 30% is added. So now you have 60%, because during the first implementation phase, if there are any gaps, for example, if there are custom port required, or if you want to implement PAM 360 agent, if there is no ports open between the server and the devices, that can be done. So now I have 60%. So because I have addressed the gap on the week 4, so I have 60% of devices onboarded. Additionally, I enable the rotation, the password rotation capabilities by defining password policies for different device types, and also compliance reports we have started here. And if there is any workflow automation that has to be configured, this goes here as well. And week 6, you have a completed thing, like we have 100% of devices put in place. Full monitoring is available. If any SIEM integration is required for real-time alerting and monitoring, that has been implemented in the third wave. So this completes the 100% deliverable that's required. It doesn't just stop there. Next is the very important phase where you have the testing and validation conducted. So what are the key activities that you have to do, and what are the deliveries that you have to do? That is, validate the security controls, meaning like if you have PAM properly deployed in a secure place, in a secure server with all the encryption in place, if this is set up with a high availability mode, which is very important for a PAM tool, because when a privileged access management product is in place, that becomes the gateway for any other devices you have in your organization. So high availability is very important. How you have structured that and how you have implemented, you have to test it, and you have to run some tests, failover test, which is very important during this phase. So if you have to do a real-time test, like a drill, you have to do it, like a fire drill that we do in our office. You have to do a drill, bringing down one of the servers or cutting down the access, and see if the users are able to access the other servers that are available, is something that you have to do during this testing phase. Apart from that, how the password policies are defined, if the resets are happening fine, if there are any gaps during display, you have to remediate it here during this week 7, during the testing and validation phase. You have to remove that. So this comes under the week 7. Week 8, transitioning to operations. So now slowly you have to train the operations team about, like, now a PAM solution is implemented, how do you have to use it? You have to, because that's very important, because adoption, user have to adopt a new tool or a new practice that you put in place. So training is very important. You have to finalize the document, establish a governance framework, like how your auditors will monitor the activities of the users, how alerting is configured, how an anomaly is detected. All that comes here in the operations phase. Implement the compliance checking, like if PCI DSS, what are the sections it matches? If it's HIPAA, what are the sections it matches? Implement those compliance check. Transition to BAU operations. And coming into the deliverables, you have the operations manual ready, training is completed, governance structure. So this is the one phase of implementation where you have 80% of PAM process in place. It doesn't stop there. You still have 20% more, which is the next step. So this would be a summary of like how you transition to operations from the implementation phase. And then success metrics is you have 100% of privileged accounts under management, 100% of servers with appropriate monitoring and syncing. That is, you have a periodic sync, so new servers automatically gets onboarded. Rotation of all service accounts. Service accounts are discovered and also in turn they are rotated. New service accounts are automatically synced and even that comes into the rotation policy. Zero unmanaged privileged access path. So apart from PAM, there is no other path a user can use to get into the server because if you have a backdoor for your third-party vendors, even using that backdoor, an attacker can come and laterally move into your network. So zero unmanaged privileged access path is another success metric. Complete the audit trial for privileged sessions. Full documentation with approved exceptions has to be done during this phase, which is the success metrics. Post-implementation. Now, as I told you earlier, we have completed only 80%. Remaining 20% is how do you set up automated compliance reporting, just-in-time access provisioning for the users to obtain privilege only when needed, time-bound access to a critical server, and cloud integration. For example, you have something called CIEM capability with PAM 360, with which you can monitor all your IAM accounts with your AWS infrastructure, and you can identify the overprivileged accounts, remove the access. So these are some things that you have to do next, right? So you have to identify the overprivileged accounts, the unused accounts, orphaned accounts, remove them from your cloud infrastructure because you have to keep them safe. And when it comes to DevOps, you have CI/CD pipeline running every day, and that has to be secured as well. And you should not use the credentials anywhere in a plain text. So these are some next steps that you complete in order to finish the 100%. And it is not a set it and forget it mentality. You have to run through this every 2 months or 3 months. You have to monitor, see if there is any upgrades available for the PAM tool with new features. How do you can safely implement that and also roll it out to the users? You have to keep monitoring it. These are the post-implementation things that you have to take care of. This is a progress tracker that you can use it in order to identify where do you stand and which different milestones are there. And when the final goal is to attain zero standing privilege for each and every users in your organization, be it internal users or third-party users. Zero standing privilege is the goal. And how do you achieve this is what you have to do, go by stages to achieve this. And this is a project like progress tracker that you can have it. With that said, thank you for your time. Thank you one and all. Have a wonderful day ahead.